Hi, you've reached this video, you've stumbled across it, and we're going to talk about obsessive-compulsive disorder, one of my favorite conditions to treat, helping people with their intrusive thoughts and excessive obsessions. So there is a large umbrella term to describe lots of varying subclasses under that. So whether you have had a psychiatric appraisal or you're seeing a psychologist, or it's mild or it's extreme, there can be different offshoots. So there can be things like impulsive control disorder, where possibly pulling your hair or skin pricking or gambling or compulsive shopping, kleptomania, for example. There can be children with pandas, that's related to streptococcal infections, or there can be PANS, which is non-streptococcal, associated with underlying infections in kids. They're the main areas of obsessive compulsive, but the signs of that can be worried about contamination of food, or hand washing, or over showering or grooming. Maybe thinking about checking on things of safety, checking doors or switches, self-harm or harming others, hoarding or saving things, and rituals like that. Counting could be another one. Keeping things symmetrical. Obsessing about diet or certain foods, or obsessing on self-image of body. Those are the main areas of this obsessive-compulsive disorder. So the basic underlying issues related to that is neurotransmitter regulation. So in our body, we're having certain neurotransmitters like GABA, glutamate, dopamine, serotonin, adrenaline, etc. And they're regulating our kind of, in a car, acceleration and brakes. So there's this constant dance of giving us stimulation and motivation and energy. And these neurotransmitters, they basically get out of balance. And certain ones like dopamine are our reward neurotransmitters. And when the receptors in our brain are affected, or our production of dopamine, or other regulations of other neurotransmitters, then that gets kicked out. Now, we all have obsessive-compulsive disorder to a degree. We might want to iron our shirts a certain way, or keep our house clean, or collect garden ornaments. But how much does that encroach on our everyday activities? Is it disrupting our family? Are we doing things to an extreme? That's the real issue. So the areas of the drivers of this and the worsening of this condition, covering the different areas there's always a stress component. So in that fight or flight stressor in our physiology, we're supposed to see a tiger and we're supposed to run away from it. But in this day and age, we can be exposed to too much stress. So if our work is constantly stressing us, our boss is screaming down our neck, and we're dreading going there, or we're dreading going to school, then that's a constant chronic stress which will affect those neurotransmitters. There's also often I talked about the imbalance of the neurotransmitters, but glutamate and GABA imbalance. So GABA is very calming and a lot to do with gut function. That's where we make our GABA, and down-regulating it, making us feel relaxed and like we're covered in cotton wool. But glutamate is stimulatory. So you've no doubt heard of MSG, monosodium glutamate. So some people are sensitive to that glutamate. They get headaches, or it's stimulating. So there's usually a disruption in the glutamate GABA, so overstimulation, less calming. Now, there's usually inflammation. There's underlying inflammation in your body. There can be some hormonal changes, so testosterone or estrogen, and that's affecting the HPA axis, which is hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, related to stress also. There can be thyroid issues, so underactive or overactive. There can be heavy metal exposure as well, so things like excess copper, excess cadmium, excess mercury, excess lead. They're all affecting our neurotransmitters, gut inflammation, and they're all tied in together. There can be traumatic brain injury, so sometimes people after a car accident can get obsessive. So if you're playing sports perhaps and in thinking about if you're suddenly experiencing this, or a child, then consider, was there a sport injury that you may not have known about, a brain injury or a lesion? They can be also related to birth hypoxia, so during the pregnancy of umbilical cord wrapping and causing less oxygen to the brain. These can be underlying issues and drivers for obsessive-compulsive personality disorder or obsessive-compulsive disorder. Now let's get into how can we feel better. So what are we going to do to try and assist the recovery of those neurotransmitters and down-regulate the over-obsession? And so obviously there's some red flags. If you're feeling suicidal, then definitely get in touch with a doctor or emergency department as soon as possible. Get a psychologist to assess or a psychiatrist to assess and make sure there's no other comorbidities such as depression or bipolar or other things like that. So for the treatment priorities, we want to try and downregulate those intrusive thoughts. We want to get the hormones into balance, get the stress down, detox some of those things which may be affecting our nutrition, and recalibrate those thoughts. Now, specifically, naturally, what could we do there? There are quite a lot, and it has to be personalized normally. So one area is stress. So when we can, it's almost like exposure therapy, where if someone does obsess over a certain thing, or they have a phobia or a fear, then psychologists could use that exposure technique. But in a herbal aspect or a naturopathic aspect, we could downregulate the stress hormones, and then in a way we're recalibrating those neuropathways to create new pathways. So moving from that stress state into a calming state, and when that's repeated over weeks, a patient can feel, for the last week I haven't had those patterns, so I'm creating new patterns of not washing my hands as much, or I'm creating new patterns of not worrying about if the oven is on, etc. So there's some wonderful herbs, and those herbs behind me are fantastic. But let's pick something like passion flower. Passion flower grows beautifully, looks in the garden, it's different to the fruit-bearing one, Passiflora incarnata. But there are studies showing that link with that GABA, so that key neurotransmitter GABA. So for example, one study I'll show here, a clinical trial involving 154 participants, and they had nervous tension. They were treated with just over 1,000 milligrams a day of passion flower for 12 weeks. And the findings were significantly reduced the stress-associated symptoms of restlessness, sleep disturbances, exhaustion. There are various other herbs like kava or lavender or magnolia also has a GABA effect. Now, the next thing we can talk about in the evidence is magnesium, classic magnesium. So one study, there are a great deal of studies, but one study, randomized trial of subjects with 450 milligrams a day, 12 weeks, showed to be just as effective as an antidepressant treatment, a pharmaceutical. So just magnesium, and that was only 450 milligrams a day for 12 weeks. And that randomized trial of subjects showed improvements in mood. Now, there are other considerations, and one which I should definitely mention is N-acetylcysteine. Now, there is a ton of supporting evidence for N-acetylcysteine for use very safely with OCD. The study I'll show now is 2,000 milligrams a day drastically reduced the intrusive thoughts of OCD. Now, those are 3 really helpful herbs and nutrients to address OCD symptoms. And for more information, you can visit other videos or have a look at the webpage. Now, remember to like and subscribe. It really helps spread the word of this information to span out and help other people out there looking for help on OCD. Thank you very much for watching, and see you on the next video.